Picture this. You're standing in your own driveway, the morning mist still clinging to the asphalt, holding a fishing rod that's seen more sunrises than most people have seen hot breakfasts, and suddenly, you're slapped with a $500 fine for standing on your own property. That's exactly where I found myself last Tuesday, staring down at a neon orange citation handed to me by a woman who wears authority like a cheap perfume, pungent and suffocating. Corinna Vance, the self-appointed queen of Oak Haven Reserve, decided to fine me $500 for fishing in the neighborhood lake, the same lake I've cast a line into for 12 years, the same spot where my wife, Martha, and I spent our last quiet moments before the cancer finally stole her away. It wasn't just about the money. Though $500 is a lot for a retired electrician living on a fixed pension, it was the sheer audacity of it, the violation of a sacred ritual that was the only thing keeping me tethered to sanity in a house that had grown far too quiet. I've lived in Oak Haven since before the ink was dry on the development plans, back when Martha and I bought our modest ranch on Cedar Lane specifically for that view, for that water, for the promise of peace. We had a routine, Martha and I, a science really, 6 a.m. sharp, thermos of black coffee, 2 folding chairs, and the sound of the world waking up. And even after she got sick, even when she was too weak to hold the rod, she'd sit there wrapped in her favorite quilt, listening to the water lap against the shore, telling me that as long as the water was moving, life was moving. So when Corinna rolled up in her pristine silver Lexus, rolling down the window just enough to slide that ticket out with a manicured hand, sneering about unauthorized recreational use by a non-resident, I felt something inside me snap, like a high-tension wire finally giving way under too much load. Non-resident, I asked, my voice shaking not with fear, but with a rage so cold it burned. I've lived here longer than you've been selling overpriced condos, Corinna. She didn't even blink, just adjusted her designer sunglasses and told me that under the new bylaws that were apparently passed in a secret midnight session that nobody knew about, residents now required a $200 annual aquatic usage permit. And since I didn't have one, I was technically trespassing on HOA property. The smell of the lake water was still on my flannel shirt, mixing with the scent of fresh-cut grass, and in the distance, I could hear the faint, melodic chime of Martha's memorial wind chime, a simple copper thing I'd hung from the old oak tree, and Corinna, sensing my hesitation, decided to twist the knife, looking past me at the tree and muttering something about unsightly yard debris that would need to be addressed in a separate citation. That wind chime was the last anniversary gift I ever gave Martha, made from recycled copper piping because she loved the way it caught the light, and hearing this woman, this bureaucratic vulture, call it debris, felt like she was spitting on my wife's grave. I wanted to scream, I wanted to throw the tackle box through her windshield, but 30 years of troubleshooting complex electrical grids taught me that when a circuit blows, you don't just kick the breaker box, you trace the fault to the source. Corinna drove off, leaving me fuming in the driveway, but she had made a critical tactical error. She mistook my silence for submission, when in reality, she had just given a grieving man with too much free time a mission. I went straight to her office, which doubles as the HOA headquarters, a soulless room that smells of stale potpourri and ambition, and tried to reason with her, explaining about the tradition, about Martha, about how I've been fishing that water since before Corinna knew where Oak Haven was on a map. She sat there behind a desk that was 3 sizes too big, tapping her acrylic nails on the glass, and delivered the line that launched a war. I'm sure your late wife would want you to respect community standards. Rules are rules, Elias. Pay within 30 days, or we place a lien on your home. A lien on the house Martha died in. That was the moment the sadness evaporated and was replaced by a cold, calculating determination, because I realized this wasn't about rules, it was about power. It was about a woman who married Councilman Greg Vance and thought his minor political influence made her untouchable. She started escalating immediately, driving past my house 4-5 times a day, slowing down to snap photos of my trash cans if they were out 10 minutes past pickup, measuring the grass height with a ruler. She even sent me a formal violation letter for the wind chime, demanding its removal within 48 hours. But she didn't know who she was dealing with. I'm a man who reads manuals for fun, a man who finds comfort in the fine print. I drove downtown to the county courthouse, that monolithic brick building that smells like dust and indifference, and I buried myself in the records room, bypassing the digitized files and going straight for the physical archives in the basement, the stuff that smells like vinegar and old paper. The clerk, a wonderful woman named Mrs. Abernathy who looked like she'd been stamping forms since the Nixon administration, helped me navigate the labyrinth of developer filings. Most folks don't dig this deep, she told me, handing over a box labeled Oak Ridge Developers Incorporated, the company that built our neighborhood 12 years ago. I spent 6 hours down there, fueled by vending machine coffee that tasted like battery acid, tracing the lineage of the HOA, looking for the authorization that allowed them to change the lake rules without a 75% community vote. And that's when I found the smoking gun, the holy grail of bureaucratic incompetence. When Oak Ridge Developers dissolved the LLC back in the late 90s after selling the final lot, they were supposed to transfer the title of the common areas, the parks, the roads, and the lake, to the newly formed HOA. They transferred the roads. They transferred the playground. But whether it was a clerical error, laziness, or just plain stupidity, the deed to the 4.7-acre lake and the surrounding shoreline was never transferred. The developer dissolved, the assets were abandoned, and according to the county ledger staring me in the face, the lake didn't belong to the HOA. It didn't belong to Corinna. It had reverted to the county as surplus abandoned property. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. For 8 years, Corinna and her board had been charging fees, issuing fines, and acting like feudal lords over a body of water they didn't even own. It was a con, a long con, and she probably didn't even know it. She just assumed power that wasn't hers. But the best part, the part that made me smile for the first time in months, was what Mrs. Abernathy showed me on her computer screen. Because the property was abandoned and generating no tax revenue, the county had scheduled it for a surplus auction in 6 weeks. Starting bid, $125,000. I sat there in that dusty basement, thinking about the life insurance payout from Martha that was sitting in my savings account, $180,000 that I hadn't touched because spending it felt like admitting she was really gone. She always told me to use it for something that brought me peace, something that mattered. I realized then that I could do more than just fight the ticket. I could buy the lake. I could literally own the ground Corinna stood on when she tried to bully me. But I needed allies. I couldn't do this alone. So I went to see Mrs. Higgins, the neighborhood matriarch who lived 3 doors down. She's 80 years old, sharp as a tack, and knows where every skeleton in Oakhaven is buried. When I told her what I found, she let out a cackle that would have frightened a witch. "Oh, honey," she said, pouring me a cup of tea. "Corinna tried to find me last week for my hydrangeas being too vibrant. I'm in." Through Mrs. Higgins, we recruited Captain Reynolds, a retired Army logistician whose husband is currently deployed, and Elena Castillo, a sweet woman who acts as the neighborhood translator but had been targeted by Corinna for her cultural decorations. We formed a resistance cell in Mrs. Higgins' basement, mapping out Corinna's patrol routes, documenting her harassment, and preparing for the auction. We had to keep it a secret. If Corinna found out the lake was for sale, she'd use the HOA reserves to buy it and seal her power forever. We had 6 weeks to play dumb, take the abuse, and prepare to steal her kingdom right from under her nose. The next few weeks were a masterclass in psychological warfare, but I had to play the role of the beaten dog. Corinna ramped up her attacks, drunk on power and completely oblivious to the sword of Damocles hanging over her blowout hairdo. She filed a complaint with the city claiming I was running an illegal commercial business from my home because my old work truck was parked in the driveway. Never mind that half the neighborhood works remotely. Elena Castillo told me Corinna had been spreading rumors that grief had made me unstable, that I was a danger to the community, weaponizing my own tragedy to isolate me. The turning point, the moment that solidified the neighborhood's hatred for her, happened on a stormy Thursday night. Elena's basement pipe burst, flooding her home with 3 inches of water. I rushed over with my tools. Emergency plumbing is second nature to an old trade union guy. But when I got there, I couldn't pull into the driveway. Corinna's silver Lexus was blocking the entrance, hazard lights flashing. She wasn't helping. She was standing in the rain with an umbrella, lecturing Elena about unapproved contractor vetting procedures, while water destroyed the poor woman's foundation. I parked on the lawn, a citation waiting to happen, and ran past her. "Elias," she screeched, You are not authorized to perform work without a permit filed with the board. I ignored her, fixed the leak, and saved Elena's home, but Elena's teenage daughter live-streamed the whole thing. The video of Corinna blocking a driveway during an emergency went viral in our local Facebook group. It showed her true colors. She didn't care about the community. She cared about control. That incident pushed me to hire Samuel Sterling, a lawyer in town who specializes in property disputes and hates HOAs with the fiery passion of 1,000 suns. When I showed him the deed research, he looked like a kid on Christmas morning. "This is fraud, Elias," he said, leaning back in his creaking leather chair. "She's collecting money for property she doesn't manage. If you win this auction, her entire legal standing evaporates. But we have to be careful. If she gets wind of this, she'll file an injunction." So we went dark. We met in secret. Captain Reynolds organized the logistics, ensuring I had all the certified funds ready. I liquidated Martha's insurance policy, my hands shaking as I signed the transfer. It felt like I was gambling with her memory, but then I remembered the wind chime. I remembered the peace we had, and I knew she'd be driving the getaway car if she were here. Then, Corinna made her fatal mistake. Sensing the growing resentment, she called an emergency town hall for the Monday after the auction. The agenda? A special assessment fee of $2,000 per household to hire private security and legal counsel to combat disruptive residents. She was going to use the neighborhood's money to fight me. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. She was planning her coronation 3 days after she was about to lose the throne. The morning of the auction, the air was crisp, the kind of day Martha loved. I drove to the county courthouse with Samuel Sterling. The room was cold, filled with the smell of floor wax and desperation. There were only 4 bidders. 2 were slick developers in suits, guys who looked like they'd pave over paradise to put up a parking lot without blinking. The third was an older gentleman looking for a private fishing retreat. And then there was me, a guy in a flannel shirt with his entire life savings in a cashier's check. Old Man Jenkins, the auctioneer, started the bidding at $125,000. "I have $125,000, he droned. One of the suits raised a paddle. $140,000. My stomach did a backflip. $155,000, the second suit countered. They were tossing numbers around like they were buying a used car, not the soul of a community. I waited. Samuel squeezed my arm. "Patience," he whispered. The old man dropped out at $165,000. It was just me and the developers. $170,000, the first suit said, checking his watch like he had a tea time to catch. This was it. This was Martha's money. My house collateral. Everything. I raised my paddle. $175,000. The room went silent. The developers looked at me, really looked at me, assessing if I was a serious player or just a local with a dream. The first suit shook his head and put his paddle down. Too rich for his margin. The second suit, a guy with a shark smile, raised his paddle. $180,000. That was my limit. That was the insurance money. I had a little buffer from a home equity loan I'd panic applied for, but we were in the danger zone. I thought about Corinna measuring my grass. I thought about the wind chime. I thought about the residents not welcome sign she'd practically pinned to my chest. $185,000. I choked out. The auctioneer looked at the shark. The shark punched some numbers into his phone, frowned, and capped his pen. He was out. Going once. Going twice. Old Man Jenkins slammed the gavel down. Sold. To bidder number 4 for $185,000. I slumped in my chair, drenched in sweat. I owned the lake. I owned the dock. I owned the water. Samuel Sterling was grinning like a maniac. "Now," he said, handing me the deed papers, "let's go to that meeting." Monday night rolled around, and the atmosphere in the community center was electric, heavy with dread. Corinna had packed the room, bringing along her husband, Councilman Greg Vance, for intimidation. She stood at the podium, flanked by charts showing rising crime, which was basically just me fishing and threats to stability. She looked immaculate, invincible, lecturing 150 angry neighbors about how this new $2,000 fee was for their own protection. "We must root out the elements that seek to divide us," she declared, staring directly at me in the back row. Disrespect for authority is a cancer. I waited until she asked for a motion to vote. Then I stood up. I was holding a beat-up leather briefcase Samuel Sterling had lent me. The room went quiet, dead quiet. The kind of silence where you can hear a pin drop. Before we vote on managing the lake security, I said, my voice steady, I think we need to clarify who actually owns the lake. Corinna rolled her eyes. Sit down, Elias. You're out of order. The HOA manages all common property. The HOA manages HOA property, I corrected, walking down the center aisle. But as of Saturday morning, the lake isn't HOA property. It was county surplus, and I bought it. I slapped the deed onto the table in front of her. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Corinna froze. She looked at the paper, then at me, then at her husband. Her face went from smug to pale to a shade of blotchy red I'd never seen before. This is fake. This is fraud, she screamed, her voice cracking. You can't buy the lake. It's ours. Read the deed, Corinna, I said, pointing to the county seal. I own the water. I own the shoreline. And that means you have been illegally collecting fees and fines on my private property for 8 years. That's racketeering. That's fraud. The room erupted. Mrs. Higgins stood up and started clapping. Then Captain Reynolds. Then Elena. Suddenly, it was a tidal wave of noise. Councilman Vance looked at the deed, realized his political career was about to implode if he stayed attached to this sinking ship, and actually took a step away from his wife. Corinna started hyperventilating. I'll sue you. I'll have this overturned. You're a disturbed old man. That's when Officer Daniels stepped in from the back. We'd invited her to keep the peace. She walked up to the podium, not to arrest me, but to serve Corinna with a cease and desist order Samuel had drafted, banning her from my property. The lake. The meeting dissolved into chaos, but the good kind. The neighbors surrounded me, shaking my hand, some crying. Corinna grabbed her purse and stormed out, her heels clicking frantically, but nobody was watching her anymore. Her power had evaporated the moment that gavel hit the wood. In the weeks that followed, Corinna and Greg put their house on the market. They moved to Arizona, presumably to find a cactus to yell at. The new HOA board, led by Mrs. Higgins, immediately refunded the illegal lake fees to the residents. As for the lake, I didn't put up a private property sign. I put up a sign that said Martha's Cove, open to all residents. I started a fishing club for the neighborhood kids. I see Elena's family having picnics there on Sundays. I'm sitting on the dock right now, watching the sun dip below the treeline. The water is calm. Martha's wind chime is singing in the breeze behind me. I spent my life savings, my safety net, on this water. Some people say it was petty. Some people say revenge is a poison. But looking at the kids casting lines where I used to sit with my wife, knowing that nobody will ever be fined for enjoying this view again, it doesn't feel like revenge. It feels like justice. But it makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many little tyrants are out there, ruling over kingdoms they don't even own, just because nobody bothered to check the paperwork? And where is the line between being a good neighbor and letting yourself be trampled? Did I go too far, or did I do exactly what had to be done? Tell me what you would have done in the comments. Would you have paid the fine, or would you have bought the lake? Until next time, keep your lines tight and your deeds verified.